the gap, standing for Jesus. Standing in the gap for family and friends. Standing in the gap, one love for all, so we all can make it in.
There's a segment that we've instituted, and it's been for a while now. It's doing great too. This segment of our ministry is called the Gap News, meaning God put us in the midst of this world to minister in it, to live in it, and all that. And we can't do that if we're not up on what's happening in this world. And so we've instituted this segment, and Marvel's in charge of that to keep us up to date on the Gap News. And I'll turn to Marvel. What Gap News do we have today?
I'm back. You know, Gap News started as like one time we were going to show something that was going on in current events. And it has grown into a thing. Because you know something, Saints? Every week there is some stuff going on in the world. Just here in America, just here in Cincinnati, things are going on. And we need to, as Christians, we need to be up on what's happening. This one is a good news, and I call it Thanks, Joe.
Well, the stock market closed at an all-time high once again today, proving once again today that Republican businessmen don't know what's good for them. And yes, I'm using the antiquated term businessmen deliberately because the thinking of the people I'm referring to is antiquated. The last time it made any sense at all for Republican businessmen to vote Republican was back when they all really were men, no women allowed, in the 1920s, back when the stock market crashed in 1929 under Republican President Herbert Hoover, and then the country sank into the deepest depression it has ever suffered. There wasn't a single Republican politician who had any idea what to do about that. Then came Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, elected in 1932 in the depths of the Depression, and that Democratic president created the policies that saved the American economy. If your business survived the Depression, it was because of the policies of the Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt. Those policies helped your business survive the Depression. Franklin Delano Roosevelt held the banking system together by himself in the first days of his presidency, when the entire American banking system was on the verge of collapse, the whole thing. What did Republican businessmen do? They opposed President Roosevelt. They have never known what is good for them. And what is good for them is a Democratic presidency that knows how to get things done to help their businesses keep running. The economy does better under Democratic presidents. That is a simple fact of American economic history. And there are many businessmen and businesswomen who understand that and vote accordingly. They vote in their own self-interest for Democratic presidents. But Republican businessmen remain the dominant voice in American media. And it is a voice that is almost always wrong. And so there are noisy Republican businessmen who are now voicing their support for Donald Trump without ever thanking Joe Biden for helping them get richer than they have ever been during the Biden presidency. Those people never thanked President Obama for getting the economy back on track after the financial crisis of 2008, when Wall Street investment banks collapsed. Those Wall Street investment banks collapsed in the final year of an 8-year Republican presidency. Those Wall Street bankers got fabulously wealthy beyond their wildest dreams during the 8 years of the Democratic presidency of Bill Clinton. And then some of them lost everything under the Republican presidency of George W. Bush. And many of them still enthusiastically vote Republican because they are uneducable. We do not send our best to Wall Street. We send our greediest. And many of them are too ignorant to understand how competent Democratic presidents enrich the economy and always make the rich people who vote against them richer. Not all of them, not all of the people in business are too dense to understand that. Democratic presidential candidates get plenty of contributions and support from investment bankers and business owners and business executives who actually understand how the economy works and the government's essential position in the economy. Infrastructure spending is one of the simplest illustrations of this. The Trump White House cartoonishly scheduled and rescheduled Infrastructure Week for 4 years and never passed a single bill providing a single improvement in American infrastructure. Not one brick. Donald Trump built nothing. Joe Biden passed an infrastructure bill and signed it into law, and he did it with bipartisan support in the Senate. Many of the Republicans who voted against that bill in the House and the Senate now step forward to take credit for the infrastructure improvements that bill is delivering in Republican congressional districts and Republican states. Infrastructure improvements are usually planned carefully for years before the first day of work on a project begins. But this year, we saw a case of emergency infrastructure work like we have never seen before when 112,383 metric tons of a container ship crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge across Baltimore Harbor and instantly closed all shipping in and out of Baltimore. That was not a problem for Baltimore businesses. That was a problem for the world. Grain harvested in the Great Plains is shipped to countries around the world through the Port of Baltimore. That means there were businesses large and small in places like Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas that would be hurt by the closing of the Port of Baltimore. The first stage of the story was tragedy for the 6 men who lost their lives working on the bridge when it collapsed. The only thing that was going to be able to get those ships out of the Port of Baltimore was competent government inaction, and the American economy is lucky, and American businesses are lucky that everyone involved at every level of government that needed to coordinate on this emergency infrastructure project is a Democrat. Democratic President Joe Biden, Democratic Governor Wes Moore, Democratic Mayor of Baltimore Brandon Scott. Anything less than full emergency speed in response to this infrastructure emergency could have meant that it would take a year or years just to reopen the shipping channel in the Port of Baltimore. 11 weeks. 11 weeks led by Joe Biden. The emergency infrastructure project in the Port of Baltimore took 11 weeks. And this week, the port reopened.
I've been waiting to say this for every day for the last 11 weeks. Maryland, the Fort McHenry Channel is fully cleared and the Port of Baltimore is reopened for business. This would not have happened without our extraordinary partners in the Biden-Harris administration. Now, I remember the first phone call that I got from the White House was around 3:30 that morning. And they have been in lockstep with us every single step of the way. They helped us to stand up the Small Business Administration's recovery centers in Baltimore to help individuals and businesses affected by the collapse. They delivered $60 million in emergency funding just days after the bridge fell. President Biden himself took the time to come to Baltimore and to meet with us about the path forward. Maryland is deeply grateful for the leadership of President Biden and the leadership of Vice President Harris.
That was Governor Wes Moore at the Port of Baltimore today. There's another version of this story that could have happened. President Biden goes to Baltimore, promises to do everything that he can to reopen the port as fast as possible, and then he fails. Then the resources cannot be coordinated with the highly skilled workers needed immediately to do the work of dismantling the bridge and dredging the channel. The workers and equipment ready to do this kind of specialty job aren't just sitting around waiting for emergency phone calls. Failure was more likely than success in this mission, in this timetable. Just ask Donald Trump, who did not build or rebuild anything during his presidency. If Joe Biden failed at reopening the Port of Baltimore, Republicans would be campaigning against him in November, saying he failed to do that. And Donald Trump, of course, would be promising to reopen the Port of Baltimore on his first day in the White House again. And Trump voters would, of course, believe that nonsense because they have proved they will believe anything. But that is not the way it happened. Joe Biden delivered on his promise. And when he did, he makes it look easy. And no Republican businessman is going to say, thanks, Joe. This is what winning and good government looks like. And most voters will never realize, most voters in the country will never realize how important Joe Biden's governing skills, including his emergency governing skills, are in solving a problem like this that no president before him has ever had to face. Joe Biden couldn't turn to anyone in the White House and say, how did Lyndon Johnson handle this? How did Ronald Reagan handle this? Joe Biden had to use all of his experience in government and his understanding of the region and the port's importance to the American economy to quickly figure out how to handle this.
President Biden made clear from that first day in those early hours that the federal government would do everything that we could to support the city, the county, the state, to get the Port of Baltimore back open and to get that bridge rebuilt. And what followed was an embrace of the people of Baltimore by the whole administration and really by the whole country to get this port back open in less than 100 days.
Being a Republican businessman means you never have to say thank you to the Democrats who save your business.
That was really good news, wasn't it?
Sure was.
I remember that when that bridge fell down like that, horrific view. And, 6 people lost their lives. They were working the midnight shift to fill potholes, if I'm not mistaken. But then the government, people say the government, get the government out of my life. And I mean, there's some places where I do want the government out of my life, but the government came in and on all levels, at the city level with the mayor, at the state level with the governor, and then federally with the Biden-Harris administration, they got that place cleaned out and reopened in only 11 weeks. And the economic impact of that Port of Baltimore is so huge for America and, like Lawrence said, for the entire world. So many things, all of the parts and things like that that come into the country for our farm equipment comes in through the Port of Baltimore. All of the grain that we grow in the heartland of America, that goes out of the Port of Baltimore. What do you think about this phenomenal achievement, really?
Oh, you're talking to me?
Yes, I'm talking to you.
I thought you might have been talking to those who are listening.
Well,
whatever.
so nobody has made any comments, but if you have any comments online, please put them in the chat box and I'll put them up.
All right, I'll say what I had to say about that. And I've said this before. I am not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. That means I can go whatever way I want to go with and take in information and make a rational decision. But um, you know, when it comes down to things like what is true and what is not true, I mean, that deal that happened in Baltimore is fantastic that they were able to get that done as soon as they can. Because see, when you put somebody in government, you put them in charge.
Yes.
And when you put them in charge, you want them to take charge and do the right thing and help everybody and all that, and know what they're doing. I mean, you know, the last thing you need is some incompetent person in charge,
Oh yes.
as we found through the pandemic.
Oh yes.
I mean, when you look at what is going on in the world and this government and all that kind of thing, the only thing I can say is I hate hypocrisy. You know, I mean, I hate somebody that's gonna lie in my face. I hate somebody that is only out there looking for themselves and wants to be a dictator and all that kind of thing. I take all that information in, and being independent, I don't have to go by what the Democrats think of it. I don't have to go by what the Republicans think of it. I go by what I think of it, and all I can take in from this Biden administration is he's trying to do the right thing, and you can tell by what happened with his son. His son gets convicted. He's got the power to do away with all that, and he says, "No, I'm going to respect the rule of law, and I'm not going to pardon him and all that kind of thing." Now, you got to understand, the other guy wouldn't do that. He's pardoned so many felons and all that, and then congregates with them. And so, bottom line, in this world, God wants us to take in the information, rationalize it in your soul, and do the right thing. And justice to love mercy. And when I thought about that love mercy part, I was saying, yeah, I think Hunter Biden was guilty of what he was charged with. But the mercy and the hypocrisy that comes in is saying that nobody else would have been charged with it. You're only charging it to hurt somebody else. That's not the same way with this 34 convicted felon. He did those things, and he did it for his own good and all that, not to help anybody but himself. So I'm sorry, and I didn't mean to go that long on that.
But we have kind of gone down another path, but that was also news this week, and I didn't cover it, but you did. Thank you.
All right. Is there anything else for Gap News?
Thanks, Joe.